Hamish de Bretton-Gordon is a retired British Army colonel, former commander of NATO's and UK's chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear reaction troops. Welcome to our program, Colonel Hamish.
Thank you very much for having me.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says that Vladimir Putin will die soon and after that the war will be over. What is your reaction to such a statement from President Zelenskyy?
Well, I haven't heard it myself, and I'm sure he's not being absolutely literal in what he's saying here. But it is certainly true that the war is being elongated by the Russians. The Russians seem to, although they are talking a good game with the Americans and others, it seems pretty clear that actually Putin and the Russians have no interest in a peace at the moment. Putin believes that he's winning and making progress. He can see that there are fractures in the Western resolve against him, and some of the conditions he's putting on a ceasefire. He agrees a ceasefire 1 minute and then the next minute puts unbelievable conditions on that ceasefire, making it virtually impossible. So I would agree with President Zelenskyy at the moment that the main the block to peace is Putin himself, who refuses to agree any meaningful terms to a ceasefire. I think everybody except the Russians, and in particular President Putin, wants a peace in Ukraine as soon as possible, but it's got to be a just peace that will satisfy the people of Ukraine and President Zelenskyy. But at the moment, Putin is the block, the person in the way of it. And I think the final thing I'd say on this is that Putin knows that he has cost his country a devastating amount of casualties, which are not really known in Russia. And I think Putin knows that once the mothers of Russia realize that Putin has been responsible for nearly 1 million casualties, his time in office will be short. So, yeah, I think the bottom line is that that Putin has no desire for peace at the moment and wants to keep going as long as possible. So that is the inference I get from President Zelensky's comments recently.
I will cover with you ceasefire negotiations, but let's also discuss recent Ukrainian strikes deep inside Russia. Ukrainian strike on Russia's Engels 2 strategic aviation airfield has destroyed 96 Russian cruise missiles, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. How can you assess such result of Ukrainian long-range strikes?
Well, I think in recent days, some of the Ukrainian long-range strikes have been very, very effective. Earlier this week, we heard that Ukraine had destroyed 4 Russian helicopters at a Russian base, which was very significant. And then, as you've described, the destruction of nearly 100 cruise missiles is very significant. I think it really shows 2 things. First of all, that the intelligence that the Ukraine military are getting, and one assumes that some of this intelligence is coming from the United States and allies like the United Kingdom, and we know that a few weeks ago, America turned off some of its intelligence. It would appear that that intelligence is now free-flowing again, which is an excellent thing and helpful to allow Ukraine to prosecute these long-range operations. The second thing I think that's really important is showing how competent and effective Ukraine attacks can be. And a lot of the weaponry that's been used has been developed in Ukraine itself, and the accuracy and the ability to hit significant targets, because that now means there are 96 cruise missiles which will not be fired at Ukrainian hospitals and schools and power infrastructure. And a cruise missile in its own is a significant piece of equipment, costing thousands, if not millions of dollars. So this is a really important blow that Ukraine has done to not only stop the ability of the Russians to attack more and more civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, but also is a very clear message to Russia that Ukraine can be on the offensive, and now that intelligence is flowing freely again, targets are not safe in Russia. And hopefully, this demonstration might well lead Putin and his negotiators to be flexible and realistic when it comes to discussing the ceasefire.
From your perspective, does the UK government still allow Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia with British-made Storm Shadow cruise missiles? Because we haven't heard about these strikes for a while.
As far as I'm aware, and I've seen nothing to the contrary, that Ukraine is still able to fire British Storm Shadow missiles deep into Russia. But I have heard nothing, and I've seen nothing to contradict that in the open press or media.
Also, Ukraine recently has developed a new long-range missile with a range more than 600 miles. The Long Neptune missile. What is your take on such development?
Well, I think this is a demonstration of the capabilities that the Ukraine military and its scientific establishment and others have developed over the last 3 years. And that has been a very, very significant and very impressive piece of what the Ukraine people have been able to do. We've discussed many times the shortage of weapons and the slowness for weapons to be deployed to Ukraine. But actually, we also know that Ukraine has got on itself and has not waited for those. And this Neptune missile that we're now aware of is a personification and demonstration of that. You know, this is being able to fire, you know, a missile with a decent payload, a decent warhead, you know, over a considerable distance and be successful. This is not an insignificant capability. And again, I think it's a very positive step, again, and really a demonstration to the Russians that Ukraine's not standing still, that they are going forward and they will get better and more effective weapons, you know, as things progress. And you know, hopefully it'll also stimulate, you know, Western supporters to make sure that they continue and up their flow of sophisticated long-range missiles to Ukraine as well, so that, you know, it can get on a more even footing and start dominating the Russians more and pushing them back.
Let's cover also Ukraine's ceasefire negotiations. Russia has agreed to ceasefire in the Black Sea and to partial ceasefire in the air to halt attacks on Ukrainian energy grid. What is your assessment of this stage of negotiations, and what kind of game Russia is playing, Vladimir Putin and his negotiators?
Well, I think Ukraine has been very forward-leaning and very positive for the ceasefire, and seems to be doing all that it can to try and get the ceasefire enacted. Because, you know, when Ukraine agreed to a 30-day ceasefire some time ago, and the Russians sort of agreed to it, but then attacked Ukraine infrastructure virtually before the ink was dry on the paper, and showed no signs at all of wanting a ceasefire. It would appear that the Russian solution to a ceasefire is what we're calling the Black Sea deal. In other words, allowing Russia to export goods through the Black Sea, or allowing the Russian Black Sea fleet, which Ukraine has already defeated, back into the game, and also for the prevention of attacks on power infrastructure in both countries. And I think it's very important that people in the international world realize that it's actually Russia who is suffering most. Ukraine has been very successful at attacking the hydrocarbon industry in Russia, the oil and gas, and that is where Russia is getting all its money from various countries to keep its war machine going. Russia has tried to turn off the lights and turn off the heat for the last 3 winters in Ukraine by attacking its power infrastructure, and has failed. And then we hear that Russia is demanding an end to sanctions, and an opening up of the world banking facilities to Russia, which is something new, which they just throw in there so that they can say that the ceasefire has failed. So it strikes me at the moment that Putin and his negotiators are writing ceasefire deals that the Americans and others are helping with, but it's only to the advantage of Russia rather than Ukraine, and Ukraine seems to be the only country that's honouring these ceasefires. They are little bit like the 30-day ceasefire a few weeks ago. The ink is not dry on signing these agreements before the Russians break them. So Russia is not negotiating in good faith at the moment, and that is something that I think the European NATO countries, particularly Britain and France, realise. At the moment, America and the White House has its own problems of trying to sort out various leaks and others, and is less focused on this problem than really everybody else in the world would like them to be.
At the same time, Trump's national security team is really confident that a full ceasefire deal could be reached between the US, Russia and Ukraine. Do you still expect Russia to agree with a full ceasefire deal this year?
Well, one would hope so. And a lot of it does rely on the United States. It's from negotiations in Paris today. It's clear that the British and the French and some other European countries are planning to commit forces, military forces to Ukraine as a reinsurance force to guarantee a ceasefire. But it's really up to the Americans to bring Putin to the ceasefire table and get them to sign it. And at the moment, that does not seem to be the case. Certainly some of the key American negotiators seem to be more on the Moscow side than Kyiv's side, which is, seems inconceivable to us people in the UK in particular. So a full ceasefire is absolutely possible. It is going to require President Trump and some of his key supporters to get off the fence, as it were, and really lean into this. And it would appear that the European countries, led by Britain and France, are planning and ready and happy to commit military forces to Ukraine to protect and enforce a ceasefire. So it's still possible. And I think everybody, is hoping and praying that it will come to fruition. But it really needs Putin to shift and move. And at the moment, although he's saying he wants a ceasefire, his actions are not the same as what he's saying. And he at the moment seems to have no indication or desire for a ceasefire. But things may change, and it is only really the Americans at this stage who can force Putin's hand, I expect, to come to the table and find a long and lasting and proper ceasefire.
Also, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says that Russia is preparing another offensive deep inside Ukraine into the Sumy region, Kharkiv region and Zaporizhia region, according to the Ukrainian intelligence. What could this development indicate from your perspective? And do you feel that Donald Trump would be humiliated if Russia launches another attack deep inside Ukraine during negotiations?
Well, I expect Ukrainian intelligence is very good. And we know that there have been a lot of attacks in the Sumy region at the moment. We also know that the Russians have recently said there is no way that they're going to give Ukraine back the Zaporizhia nuclear power station, which they've, it's theft, which they've stolen off the Ukrainians. And we also know that President Putin, part of his stipulations for peace is that the 4 oblasts, which they've illegally taken but don't completely hold, he insists that they are integrated into Russia completely. And in order to do that, he would need to take them. So I think there is a realistic possibility that the Russians are planning that. But I also agree it would be a complete humiliation to President Trump, because no doubt American intelligence is seeing the build-up of these forces and, the potential for a successful attack, really under the noses of the Americans, is almost inconceivable. So it is certainly likely, and one will have to see. The rhetoric coming out of the White House does seem to change on an almost daily basis, but it's gone quiet recently after the dreadful security breach that came about from signal messages being published widely on the world media, talking about Americans attacking Houthis and Americans' view on Europe and the Ukraine conflict. So we shall just have to wait and see. But it's good, I think, that the Ukrainian government and military have put these potential attacks in the sort of open source and public domain, so nobody can say they didn't know if they do come to fruition. So, yeah, it's very tense times, I think, in that part of Ukraine at the moment, I'm sure.
Also, the US intelligence community continues to see the risk that Putin may resort to nuclear weapons. According to Bloomberg sources in the US intel community, how can you assess such risks right now during negotiations between the United States and Russia?
Well, I think the nuclear issue, we have discussed this many times, I know, over the last couple of years. And it is probably a reaction to recently the French saying that they would use their nuclear weapons as an umbrella to protect Europe, and potential discussions that the British nuclear capability was sufficient enough to destroy many Russian cities if it came to that. When in difficult times, the Russian hierarchy always seemed to resort to nuclear threats. This is nothing new. Virtually since the first day when Russia invaded Ukraine back in February 2022, various members of the Kremlin and others threatened nuclear attack. So I think it is nothing new. I think the key thing is, and Putin understands this, although he obviously not saying it publicly, that even the French and the British nuclear capability is enough to destroy Russia. So it would be completely counter to everything Putin is trying to achieve if there is a nuclear exchange between the Russians and, say, the British and the French. And I think because of that, and the whole nuclear debate is based around mutually assured destruction, and this basis has kept the peace in Europe for the last 75 years, I am less concerned about the nuclear standoff, as it were, and threats coming out of Putin as I am from other conventional threats at the moment.
Let's also cover recent developments in the United States. You just mentioned about this leak from this chat. Senior U.S. military officials, national security officials were discussing war plans or attack plans in Signal chat messenger in a group. Is from your perspective, is this incompetence or recklessness of U.S. national security team?
Well, Daniel, I think it's both. I think it's reckless and it's incompetent. Unfortunately, a lot of people involved in this, the Secretary of Defense, Hesketh, and the Ukraine envoy, Witkoff, and even the Deputy President Vance. Unfortunately, these people are, although they might be great businessmen, they are very inexperienced and not trained in sort of geopolitical discussions. They're not trained in military and security operations. And this is the sort of arrogance that this issue has come about, and the fact that they've all denied that important and secret information was published on Signal, on this messaging app, and trying to apportion blame to anybody but themselves, I think says an awful lot. The information that has been made public now is I think, hugely damaging. And of course, the Russians would have seen it a long time ago as well. And when one's planning military operations, the the absolute worst thing is to tell your enemy what you're going to do, or even worse, what you're not going to do ahead of any action. And the leaks from this messaging app do exactly that. So they are, incompetent, reckless, and incredibly dangerous. And one hopes that that will be the last we hear of it. There are many secure networks and communication modes that these people can use. Why on earth they're using commercially available mobile phones on commercially available apps? I'm a member of a number of messaging groups. We stopped using Signal some time ago because we knew how insecure it was. And when I was in Syria, we knew that that the Russians could listen in on these things. So it is a really unfortunate incident. I hope the new American cabinet members have learned from this. One of the greatest British generals, Field Marshal Slim, in the Second World War, allowed his subordinates to make mistakes, but woe betide them if they made the same mistake twice. So let's hope that this mistake is not repeated and we can move forward.
Let's cover also our last topic for the interview, the situation in the Middle East. Israel was preparing another ground attack inside the Gaza Strip, according to CNN. How can you assess this ceasefire deal? Is this deal dead yet, or are there any chances for this deal to survive another escalation in the Middle East?
Well, it's difficult to say, and I'm certainly not following events in Israel as closely as I am in Ukraine and elsewhere. I think it is significant that there are large protests in Gaza at the moment from Gazan people, the civilians in Gaza, against Hamas, the terrorist organization who is at the heart of this, who the Israelis, are avowing to destroy. But at the moment, it certainly looks as though the ceasefire is over. One would hope that actually, if the Gazan people can chuck Hamas out, then the killing and the fighting can stop, and the world can help Gaza and the Gazan people rebuild. But at the moment, things are looking pretty desperate and pretty sad.
Thank you, Colonel Hamish, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much for having me, Daniel. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava. Thank you very much. You just mentioned about the deterrent force. British special forces have been put on high alert to prepare for the potential deployment to Ukraine, according to the paper. How can allies, European allies, perform in Ukraine without the US backstop?
Well, look, Europe, when they work together, has enormous economic advantage over Russia. So there's economic leverage already that's there. And then when you start adding together the defense industries of all of European countries, it's way more than what Russia has. And then when you add together military capabilities of European nations, it's more than what Russia has, except in terms of nuclear weapons. So, yes, of course, I wish that the United States would be a part of this in some way. But if they're not, that doesn't change the requirement. That doesn't eliminate the need or the threat. Just because the U.S. chooses not to be a part of it. And so this is going to be a real test, a test of whether or not Europe can meet the moment that affects its security for decades to come. Yes, they can do it, but only if they summon the political will. And I think some countries have shown that they do have the will, and then maybe others will join.
You have also supported European Sky Shield initiative to defend Ukrainian skies as a part of this peacekeeping mission. Would it be possible also without participation of the US Air Force?
All of this is possible if you have the political will. It won't be as effective in the beginning because the U.S. has always provided not just aircraft, but also the command and control, the intelligence, the all the things necessary to conduct something like these air superiority missions. But regardless, if there is a ceasefire implementation force that goes in at some point, regardless of what it looks like and how it's deployed, it will have to have air and missile defense already established before it goes into Ukraine. Otherwise, they will be vulnerable to Russian missile strikes. And I think getting this so-called Sky Shield in place first will be important if we hope to have an effective deployment of a ceasefire implementation force. People should not be somehow in the false hope or belief that Russia won't shoot at a NATO country. Soldiers deployed into Ukraine are going to be vulnerable. And so we have to go in properly armed, properly equipped, ready to deter Russia from within Ukraine.
Let's also cover breaking news from the United States. White House confirms that a journalist had been added to an unsecure group in Signal, in which Trump's national security team discussed strikes on Yemen. How harmful is this incident for the U.S. national security?
Well, it's harmful in a couple of different ways. Number one, just the fact that now our adversaries know that we have leaders at the very highest level are using their cell phones on Signal to talk about the highest level classified information. I mean, this will not be the first time they will have done that. If they felt comfortable setting up a chat group and using emojis and talking about specifics about an operation that was about to happen, then obviously they've been doing it before, which means they do not have an appreciation or respect for the cumbersome procedures you're supposed to use when you're discussing highly classified information like this. So that right there tells foreign intelligence services that there's potentially opportunity where they could find a lot more information. Signal is very good, but it is not a perfect secure. Otherwise, if it was perfect, we'd all be using it all the time for classified information. The second thing is that it revealed a disdain for Europe. Now, that's not a surprise to most Europeans, but the fact that they would be making decisions and talking about Europeans, our allies, in such a way shows a gross lack of respect and also a lack of appreciation for what our allies do and provide to the United States: aerial refueling, bases, intelligence sharing, and so on. So this is dangerous for us because now allies, I think, are going to be even more reluctant to share information and share intelligence with us. They won't advertise it. They won't say, hey, U.S., sorry, we're no longer going to share with you, but they will stop sharing things. They'll begin to withhold because they'll be so concerned at this lack of discipline and unprofessional conduct at the top level. This is not good. And then the third thing, I worry, there has to have been a senior officer somewhere in, even if they weren't on this chat group, if there are senior officers that are aware of these kinds of things going on, they have a duty to call it out, to say, Mr. Secretary, you cannot do this. This is, number one, it's illegal. Number two, it's a violation of all of our normal security protocols. And number three, it puts our airmen at risk. People who would be conducting the missions, it puts them at risk. And so I hope that senior officers have been pushing back on this. Otherwise, they become a part of it. People have to make their own decisions, but in normal times, a lot of people would be getting fired after this incident. There would be huge investigations. The Congress is going to have to do, congressional oversight committees should be calling for hearings, and people should be resigning. I mean, probably, first of all, the National Security Advisor, and several others. If this was normal times, people would be resigning. Instead, what we see is the president saying, I didn't know anything about this. The Secretary of Defense immediately blaming the Mr. Goldberg from the Atlantic as being, going after his credibility, even after his own department had acknowledged, or after the administration had acknowledged that this conversation did in fact happen. So I've always believed that the first principle of leadership is accepting responsibility, and I'm not seeing that right now.
And do you also expect European allies to be more reluctant to buy American weaponry after this incident and after statements from the US leadership?
Yeah, I think countries make big decisions based on confidence in who they're dealing with, and I think most of our allies, unfortunately, were already beginning to be worried, and this will only add to their concern. Now, what I hope is that the administration will take appropriate action to regain the confidence of allies and partners, as well as customers. I mean, for our own economic interests, this is the duty of the administration to regain confidence, not to go after journalists and blame them.
Also, yes, President Donald Trump has directed to create an Iron Dome over the continental US to protect the United States from the air threats. According to CNN, Trump has insisted that the US needs to have similar to Israel's Iron Dome. What is your assessment of such a plan?
Well, of course, it is the duty of the president to protect Americans and protect our strategic interests. We need to be clear about what threats we're talking about, and the costs of doing this. And by the way, the incredible importance of Canada as a part of this defense of North America. I mean, Canada has been a part of this structure for a very long time. And so I think the effect is needed, but the capability to do that is not going to be thousands of Iron Dome missile systems. It's going to be a combination of things of air, land-based systems, and of course, a lot of this has to happen forward in Europe and in other places. So we need access that we get from our allies. And so you can't say you want to have an Iron Dome and then go around smashing relationships with our allies.
Also, President Trump announced the decision to move forward with the next generation fighter jet titled F-47. Is the price of the project worth it?
I think this is what will always be a part of the balancing act. I mean, people laughed when President Reagan talked about the Star Wars strategic defense initiative, how expensive it would be. But it was laying out the vision for that drove research and development, that drove the deployment of necessary satellites and other systems. So I'm not against it, but we need to be realistic about expectations. And again, it won't happen without support from our allies.
And let's cover our final topic. Israel is making plans for potential major ground offensive into Gaza Strip after recent airstrikes on Gaza and Lebanon. Could this lead to the end of ceasefire deal?
I'm confused. The Trump administration during the campaign before the election, Mr. Trump and his team kept talking about ending wars, to be the stop wars everywhere. And instead, here we are now, 2 months into the administration, and he has not yet stopped the war, Russia's war against Ukraine. He's ramping up aggression against the Houthis, and now Israel is violating ceasefire agreements and changing the dynamics there, which raises, I think, the risk of a conflict with Iran. And there's nothing about China. I mean, China was supposed to be the main strategic objective. Let's stop all this other stuff and focus on China. And so I don't see the connection. I don't see the strategy. By the way, I'm all for destroying the Houthis. I'm all for seeing Iran isolated and that regime that treats its own people so terrible, seeing it overthrown. The best way to do that, of course, is help Ukraine defeat Russia. Then Iran is isolated. It's no longer able to help Hamas. It's no longer able to help the Houthis. It's no longer able to support Hezbollah. And that would send a strong message of deterrence to China. Instead, what we see is incoherence. I don't see the strategic approach.
Thank you, General Hodges, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Rome Slava. Thank you, Daniel.